Hello there everybody and welcome to a new video for Age of Wonders 4. In this one I got my first build for the Dragon's Dawn DLC. It is a Feudal Culture build revolving around poison and morale playstyle. So we got a lot of moving parts, it's highly resilient, it has a dragon ruler, and it's a lot of fun. So we're using all the new tomes in this one, and, well, timestamps are down below. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about are the traits I picked for the culture here. Although I gotta say, this is more playing around than anything else. The artifact hoarders, though, is really powerful when you're playing a dragon hero because unused artifacts turn into mana income and you gain more artifacts. When you got a dragon ruler, unused artifacts turn into gold income per se. So picking this up with a dragon ruler is really way more powerful than I anticipated it, because you have a steady surplus of income this way while you're conquering the world. So the other trade I picked up, Adept Settlers, well, it's really good for the feudals in general, having the ability to have more cities, lesser Imperium costs. With the newest patch, Imperium costs got raised by a lot for Empire development skills. So I feel like this is a pretty good choice, but you could also pick up runesmiths or any other trait that lowers your mana pressure a little bit, because I think that's one of the major downsides or bottlenecks of this build. So body and mind traits, I went for nightmare mounts because they fit now so darned well into the feudal culture. They got updated. Like I said, they were underpowered, so they got upgraded even. So we gain now Vicious Killer for all of the nightmare mounted units, which inflicts double morale penalty when a nightmare mounted unit kills stuff. This is amazing. On top of that, the feudals now have mounted defenders. So we now not only have knights, we also have mounted defenders. So if these guys smack somebody, the enemy suffers double the morale penalty. And since we get these for free, the peasant pikemen evolve into these. It's really powerful. I love the new nightmare mounts, and I can only recommend you to try them out. I went for cold-blooded as the secondary trait because this makes you pretty immune against any enemy who would try to go into a similar venue, but I think overwhelmed tactics would be the strongest-ish pick if you just want to play around the massive synergy of feudals with overwhelmed tactic because of stand together, you know. Dudes stand together and get 20% more damage. Add 20% of a crit on it, and it's really good. But, well, that's my thought process behind it. So, let's get on over into the tomes. We go for the Evolution Tome as the first one, although you could also go with Tome of Roots first. It's your decision. So, we gain here massive tools. First off, I want to talk about Rapid Evolution Enchantment, because this makes everything much clearer why it's so powerful. This unit enchantment gives your tier 1 and tier 2 evolving units resurgence. That means if you win the battle, they come back with 50% of their max HP. This is massively powerful because your spearman happens to be a evolving unit. So he's already you can use your spearmen as units that just come back after combat. This allows you a massively reckless playstyle. Also, extra XP never hurts anybody. But the rest of the book synergized so darned well with this unit enchantment, that's why I wanted to start with it. The Slither Hatchling is a city's recruitable skirmisher unit with a poison ranged attack, your typical skirmisher unit, with the twist that they got Draconic Rage, which makes them hit way harder when they get wounded. Add your cultural stand together thing on top of that. These guys can increase their damage by 50% if they have a neighbor and being below 60%. Remember, they come back with 50% HP, so basically, if they died the previous fight, they come back locked and loaded with up to 50% more damage. Quite powerful. You can summon bird fledglings on top of that, just plain vanilla fighter units, but they have Draconic Rage too, and most importantly, they fly, making them super powerful and repositioning them around the battlefield with ease. They evolve eventually into different colored Vivens, while the Slither evolves into a Big Slither, which is basically more of the same. And the Wyverns, they just evolve into different flavors of elemental damage. That's pretty much it. As a battlefield tool, you gain access to youthful rejuvenation. It heals, it empowers, and it is doubly strong for evolving units, and that's why it is really good for the feudals again, because you have the ability to put this on your spear dudes as well. So 36 healing on a spearman in the very early game is a very, very good way to keep the upper hand in the early game. Draconic Vitality is a nice add-on here because it gives you just more HP for your troops in the long run, and that's just something everybody would like. No downsides, except for being quite costly on the mana side. The Shepherd support skill is also really, really worth pointing out because your tier 1 and tier 2 units will become so powerful and cheap with that one that it's really easy to overrun the enemy just with summoned Wyvern fledglings and some slithers with just that combo alone. Like I said, try to get the Feudal Culture bonus on these guys as quick as possible with the fitting unit enchantment spell. So the other tome to pick up is Tome of Roots. You have other options here, but since I wanted to go for a nature poison build, this tome is mandatory. You gain access to poison blades and poison arrows, which is just what the name would imply. You have the ability to poison the enemy with all of your attacks, and they grow a little bit stronger on the blight side. Healing Roots, well, I didn't use this too much because I have youthful regeneration, but if you want a regeneration buff instead of the empowerment buff, this spell is really powerful. Wine Prison got gutted with the Wyvern update. It is basically a pretty useless spell now. I don't know why these guys are allowed to only live one turn. Basically, I don't know if it is a release bug, but right now you cast that spell and it disappears next turn, so just skip it. It is no longer viable at all. And Endwine Thrall, yeah, it's another summonable skirmisher. On top of together with the Slither, you have a lot of skirmisher power with this build. Remember that skirmishers profit both from poison blades and poison arrows, so they are really, really nice add-ons for your build. The Herbalist Province Improvement is really, really interesting too, but only if you have forests or swamps. But seriously, if you have them, it's worth building one because mana, you can't have too much mana with this build. When we enter the tier 2 realm, here we go for a split off into the morale gameplay. Several reasons for that. The feudals are innately powerful in that ballpark, and the morale differences are just what you need to gain more damage. I'll explain more while we go over the tomes. The first one I always pick up is the Doom Herald one, because the shadow affinity I gain is something I really want, because the knowledge extraction Shadow Empire skill is still something you should grab as quick as you can, because it's just such an easy way to get some extra knowledge on the side. But also, the tome offers many tools that I personally found extremely powerful. The cruel weaponry is very powerful since we already have a natural bias to lower the enemy's morale. Joy Siphoners is going into the same venue. All of our units, except for the shock units, are multi-attackers, so they profit from that quite well too. And the Banshee is our fill-in battle mage that we will need later down the road, and she's also pretty good as a point-blank AoE nuke against enemies' morale. Cause Despair is something that you can use situationally. Prelude of Doom, well, most of the time I don't have the mana for that in all regards. Doom Depth Trench, if you happen to be evil, please by all means build one, because it's really, really good in all aspects. Don't mind the city stability, it is a minor debuff. The other tier 2 tome to pick is Tome of Revelry, because I personally think if you go Doom Herald or Revelry, you should always pick the other tome vice versa because of their massive synergy between each other. Blood Fury weapons gives your units extra morale when they kill somebody and a strengthening bonus. As you see here, it applies to the majority of your units. You also gain access to Reveler's Heart, which gives you more morale bonuses from all sources, and the Scald is a really, really nice add-on to your Bannerman, since he has a really good damage bonus, and the Song of Revelry is a really nice, soft power up in terms of regeneration. I really love the Skull's ability to turn enemies insane, so they have sort of a crowd control element to themselves as well. Very, very well-rounded unit. Can wholeheartedly recommend them. Always a lot of fun with these guys. Revels of Carnage, well, it is usually, I deem this a situational spell, but not for this build. Since you have so many evolving units, Rebels of Carnage becomes a very, very interesting tool, because you want to have your units evolved. They grow so much stronger when they do. So Rebels of Carnage is very, very synergistic with the Dragon's playstyle. Carnival of Flesh, highly synergistic with farms, and farms are what are really, really happening often on feudal builds, at least on mine. So don't forget to pick up the Revelous Triumph, because you happen to pick up a lot of critical hit damage, and support skills are generally pretty good with this build, because you can also pick up extra XP for your evolving units. And as soon as we hit the tier 3 area, we should really, really try to pick up the Tome of Dragons as the first one. The Young Dragon spell, or technology, however you want to call it, allows you to recruit these bad boys in your city. You have access to a tier 3 fighting unit that can just disable the retaliations of 3 adjacent units. It flies, it comes to the cost of a regular tier 3 unit, and if you happen to keep them alive long enough, they transform into a tier 5 mythic unit. Here comes the really powerful catch. They are really, really easy to keep alive in general, because you have this massive healing spell out of your tier 1 tome. They are not receiving the protection from Rapid Evolution enchantment because they are tier 3, so they don't have the resurgence, so don't play too reckless around them, but you have one massive healing spell for the dragons, and you also gain access to Purifying Flame, which is a 1 hex radius heal burst, which happens to be a status remover, a negative status remover as well. So these 2 things in synergy, or 3 things, make it quite easy to let your dragons survive, and you really should try to. So the other tools in this book aren't less impressive either. Flamer Focus is quite situational for us, because we don't have any native battle mages, but our Banshees transform into AoE nukers with this one, and I love it. Since we already are going down the poison path, we have damage over time. This one gives your Banshees the ability to inflict burning and bleeding to the enemy, and if the enemy goes too close to your Banshees, they still have that point blank AoE. I was at first like, yeah, that's not useful for my build at all, but when I played around the Banshees with the Flamer Focus, I totally went down a different thought. It is really good for these. It powers up the Banshees massively. Dragon Attack, well, if you have a Siege Project slot open, it's really cool, because it nukes the entire enemy army. It gives a chance of them to be on fire, and yeah, what's not to like about that? Because the Draconian Transformation makes all species immune against fire, and makes them dragons as well, and natural regeneration is bonkers. Your units will regenerate during combat. Keep in mind, they can regenerate more than they had when they started the combat, but they also heal much more on the map. All in all, this book makes you really darn hard to kill. The Wyvern Ire is something you could or should even build. 2 reasons. First off, it's a research post. Secondly, it synergizes again with farms, and I was very surprised how well the feudal playstyle fits around the dragons, so... Oh yeah, and you can pick up the fire bomb for your heroes as well, but that's just a side note here. So after that, yeah, I really leave it up to you. I personally pick up for this build, since I follow the nature path, the Tome of Cycles, to get access to Projectiles of Decay. So I have total control over the healing minigame, because decaying enemies can't regenerate HP anymore. And it also gives you the ability to play around with Parting Gifts. Parting Gifts is really interesting for this build, because you have units that can safely die, Rapid evolution enchantment allows you to just toss away units and even gain something from them, dying and coming back. So I really, really like that one. Diffuse health, well, you won't use that one too much, I guess, but it is an option to nuke and heal your units. And Druid of the Cycle, it's another interesting supporter for your ranks, as he can bring back dead units. I like that because it really is quite annoying if you have to restart battle only because one of your dragons happen to die, tier 3 ones. And with the Druid of the Cycle, you have a tool to just say, nah, I'm just gonna resurrect that guy. That makes him quite interesting. And Cycle of the Seasons, I always love that spell because it makes defending your provinces a pretty entertaining ordeal. And after that, well, affinity-wise, you have access to the other tier 4 nature tomes, but we don't need to go too deep into that because I personally think you have the game already pretty much under control after that. Tome of Paradise and Tome of Nature's Wrath will just give you more tools of the same style of keeping your units alive and buffing up the morale and making them harder to kill. The stuff down the road is more of that, and it's highly synergistic because nature playstyle is generally really powerful. Okay, so let's get into the military part. I want to talk at first about your leader. So I went for the nature dragon here because, style reasons. So when developing your leader, you gain access to many skills which turn your dragon into a massive one-man army. So all in all, focus around whatever you want, but the Dragon Lord traits are really powerful and should be preferred. Leave the supporting to your other heroes. Focus on the dragon skills while you have the level ups on your dragon. I personally found also the order aspect for this build quite interesting because it does inflict condemnation to the enemy, which lowers their status resistance. We have poison, burning, and bleeding in our roster, so this is actually quite synergistic. What I just want to point out is you start out with a massively overpowered unit that can deal so much damage right from the get-go, and you can learn various battlefield nukes, which makes this guy just a real force to be reckoned with. Don't mind the fact that he cannot wear too many artifacts. Your baseline roster, at the beginning of the game, you gotta be relying a lot on pikemen and a tad bit on the archers. I personally don't rely too much on archers with this build because of rapid evolution enchantment. I had a much better time relying on the pikemen and the slither hatchlings because you just have much more synergy with evolving units in this build generally, and the slithers, they have a ranged attack that doesn't hit too bad, and the archers, well, I didn't feel like they were really offering that much more damage compared to the slithers. So your tier 1 will be allotted around peasant pikemen and slithers, and as soon as you can recruit them, grab yourself as many of the wyvern fledglings as you can muster. Your playstyle will be a lot around trying to focus all your losses on the guys that will just stand up anyways after the battle, and it's stupidly powerful. On top of that, you have a pretty reliably or powerful heal. Once you get into the tier 2 department, add in a bannerman or two into your disposal. They really go quite well because you end up with a lot of melee units here, and melee units end up being clumped together a lot, and that's where Bannermen really shine. And I really like the fact that they can sunder defenses as well. It's not that much of a massive bonus here, but it really adds up, and you notice if you use it or not. The defenders, well, they will be what your peasant pikemen turn into, and for this build they are your finishers. Try to, in the early game at least, finish off enemies as much as you can with these guys because of the vicious killer trait, which allows you to inflict massive morale penalties to the enemy, and this will allow you to utilize your cruel weaponry and things like that faster. This gives you a massive edge in combat. And once you have access to knights, they are the real finishers because they are the double-edged sword, you know? They give your units more morale and they steal more from the enemy when they kill somebody. So try to have some knights in your ranks always, if possible. The skulls are, for me, what replaces the bannerman in the long run, because you know you don't need the bannerman's skills too much, but the scald is something you will acquire relatively late in your conquest. So these guys are in many regards, I think, just the better version, because your healing can come out of your spells mostly, and the soft regeneration here is all you need. Once you have access to wyverns and dragons, by all means, just overrun the battlefield with these guys, because they are just the best stuff that you can bring up. But it really pays off to mix in a few of your nightmare mounted troops in between, because they really add in a lot of morale pressure to the enemy, and by that point it's a lot of fun to just overrun the enemy with your tier 5 units at some point. What I also want to stress out here is that I tried to get the experienced leader skill on every one of my secondary heroes, because this is so good for your evolving units. You just got to pay attention to the fact that this is no longer a novice trait. You have to invest a little bit into the support skill tree now before you have access to that. But you know, there's shepherd, and it's really good. Okay, so that's the military aspect part. Let's talk strategy. So I personally found this build to be strong at the very beginning, very vulnerable in the transition between tier 1 and tier 2 tomes, and massively overpowered when I had access to the tools of the Doom Herald tome and the first tools of the Revelry tome. Let's not talk about what happens when you pick up dragons. When you pick up dragons, everything explodes around you. But you are quite vulnerable in that transition, so beware wars around that time. When picking up your first Lord skill for your dragon, I really like that trick that I learned from you guys to pick up the Lord of Production first for your starter city and swap your main or swap that lord around the city here a little bit. So, sorry, I mistalked. Don't put it on the main hero, put it on a secondary hero, and get that secondary hero as quick as possible. When it comes down to your economy, focusing around gold and mana never hurts, because you will pay a lot of mana and gold for your conquest and your unit expansion. I ended up with a lot of summoned units here, and well, since we're playing feudal, I also tried to expand my empire as quick as possible. It pays off massively for this build to try and kill off as many stacks of things out there as possible for your artifact collection, because your artifact collection is, as a matter of fact, one of your really major players in terms of mana income. So as you see here, it is a really big part of my economy, and also here a part of my income. So apart from that, there is not that much to say about this one, except for beware enemies that want to wage war too early on you. If this ever happens to you, you can rely on a steady swarm of summonable units, therefore focus that mana income as hard as you can. When it comes down to your skills here, the nature tree gives plenty. I want to point out that the Rite of the Guardian Spirit is really good to fill that gap between, or that vulnerable phase that I was talking about. And you also gain access to various tools out of the Chaos and Shadow Realm, but not too many. Most skills also have been made more costly for the balancing reasons. And all in all, your biggest your strongest card in this build is that you can expand like crazy and get away with it, because you have that gold and mana income. And once you have hit the point of the tier 2 tomes, it's really dirty easy to beat down the enemy, because as soon as the first dents into the enemy's morale are showing up, you're going to deal massive amounts of damage. It really goes really quickly, and you have many tools to achieve that goal. So that's all for this build. Feel free to leave me in the comments what you want to see next. I want to point out at the end that this is more of a flavorful build. It's not meta focused. It's not heavily optimized to dominate in the hottest of environments, but it was a lot of fun to conceptualize it, and it works really well because you can't just overrun the enemy. And the point of throwing away units and relying on the fact that they will come back even if as long as you win, it's really, really fun. So I hope you enjoyed as well. Leave me a thumbs up if you did. Consider subscribing, and there is a playlist link down there below, so check it out if you'd be so kind. I'd be delighted. Have a wonderful day and see you soon.